This is part 3. This is Jilliana Ranicar-Breese, and I'm back with Renate Bremer in her lovely Brighton home. And she came to Brighton after her husband died with her daughter. So you came in 1990,
That's
yes?
right, yeah.
Right.
So.
And tell me about the inspiration.
Well, the inspiration for the open house came because I saw other open houses and I thought that my house would lend itself to a display of art and sculpture. And
you were looking for something to do.
I was looking for
because you'd left the university.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
And so it just it just so happened that I went to Nigeria first, which I said to you before, after the death of my husband. And I then went back subsequently and bought lots of art there. And I thought...
No, but you'd heard of it and seen the art in Brighton, had you not?
Only the sculptures, not the art from Nigeria. The Nigerian art, that was as a result of my visit there. But the sculpture I had actually seen in another open house.
Yes.
And felt inspired by it and found out about this sculpture movement. And
what was the name of the sculpture movement?
Well,
and how did it come about?
Well, nowadays one talks about Zimbabwean stone sculpture, the Zimbabwean stone sculpture movement. Many people also refer to them as Shona sculptures because they're mainly done by the Shona people. However, many other nationalities, like the Chiva, contribute to these sculptures.
Magnificent.
They felt it was inappropriate just to refer to one group of people, the Shona, and therefore one now talks about the Zimbabwean stone sculpture movement.
So it embraces other
groups of ethnicities, yes.
Right.
Living in Zimbabwe.
Right. Yeah. Now, tell me then about Frank McEwen.
Well, Frank McEwen...
Who was a British artist.
He was a British... He ran the National Gallery of then Rhodesia.
And he was brought there from Paris, in fact.
He lived in Paris before. He had connections with Europe in the art world.
Yes, Picasso and Braque and...
modernist artists and so on.
Yes.
And of course at that time only art from Europe was shown in the National Gallery, no local art. And he thought, as a result of the political situation, when UDI, the Unilateral Declaration of Independence, came about, when Ian Smith was in power...
in 1965.
65, yes. Then things became very difficult for local people in Zimbabwe, what later became Zimbabwe. Right. And in fact, the War of Independence started in 1972. And it was then, when things were so difficult for local people, that Frank McEwen and somebody else in another place, which I'll refer to later, because there's a parallel movement going on there. But Frank McEwen, he met somebody by the name of Joram Mariga, and who became one of the... Well, now we could talk to him about the father of the whole Zimbabwean sculpture movement. But then he was a surveyor, and he, as a sideline, he produced little sculptures for the tourist market, and he showed them to Frank McEwen. He thought, oh, that guy has talent. And he said, what would you do if you made something for yourself to express your beliefs? He was a Shona, your Shona beliefs, and translated that into stone. He said, well, that would be different. So he said, well, show me. And a few weeks later, he came back with a sculpture, and that was so African and so different from anything that Frank McEwen had ever seen.
And it was not so ethnic. It was a modern piece of sculpture.
It was ethnic, but it resembled, in many respects, the sort of modern art that he was familiar from Picasso and all these other modernists.
Right.
And so he encouraged him and others, and he gave them... Some of them were the attendants in the museum, staff members of the museum, and other people. He organized a workshop there, simply providing the tools, the stone carving tools, and the stone, which there's
they didn't have any money.
Plentiful supply of stone there.
Yes.
So he supplied all that. And then out of this, by encouraging those with the talent and the others sort of went by the wayside, and encouraging them, and this movement started.
So there was a whole movement, fantastic.
Yes. And parallel to him, something similar happened in Tenginenge, which was then just a tobacco farm run by Tom Blomefield, who was... He may have been Dutch, either Dutch or German Dutch, and he had lived in South Africa, had already run a gallery at one time, was artistic, creative, but ran a tobacco farm. Of course, once UDI was declared, that stopped.
It was taken away from him.
So what was he to do, and what were all his workers to do? So he was living just on the right at the bottom of the Serpentine, where the Serpentine stone is in those quarries. They're open cast quarries where you can just go and help yourself to stone. And he provided, again, it just started by him providing stone and tools to the people around him, the workers that had been working for him on the farm. And he did a similar thing to Frank, encouraged those with talent, and out of this grew a sort of parallel movement there. And he had contact with people in Holland, so he organised exhibitions there, whereas Frank McEwen had all the contacts with London and Paris, and there were these big exhibitions there in the 1970s and 80s, and they were a big sensation, and they talked about them being, some of the artists were compared to Henry Moore and to the, other modernists, artists.
Very cozy.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we know, of course, that they were indebted to the Africans, but was their inspiration. Picasso, Derain, people like that, they went to ethnographic museums and were inspired by the
Well, Paris has always been interested in Africa, and of course jazz.
Yes.
That was the other, all the top black jazz musicians went to Paris.
Yes, quite.
Yeah, that was in the 60s and 70s.
Yes. So that's how it came about, and ever since then I've had an open house here in Brighton.
For how long?
Well, it started in 1995, and I was out I was in Harare then, and whilst I was there and having a chat with the director of a local person, a local man, and he he told me that there was a big exhibition on in London, and it was this, you may have seen it, in 1995, a big African art exhibition at the Royal Academy. And when I realized that, I thought, well, I better get a move on, and I did. That was the first time I had an open house.
Okay, and you're going to be having an open house quite soon, and you've brought over a Zimbabwe sculptor.
Yes, Philip Kotokwa.
What's his name?
Philip Kotokwa. In fact, he made this very piece.
Oh, yes.
I saw you
I did.
this.
That's a coincidence.
That is by him. He made it actually from the stone that I've got. This also for sale in my garden. You haven't seen my stone sheds yet. They're packed full of raw stone from Zimbabwe.
Right.
And he made this piece while he was here last year.
Fantastic. Yeah, and he'll be giving workshops.
Yes, he'll be running the workshops.
Yes. And what's the date?
There's three workshops. It starts on the 5th and 6th. There are 2 days, weekend
of May.
workshops. 5th and 6th
at the time of the Brighton Festival.
Yes, and then the following weekend and the one after that.
Yeah.
But the open houses are 4 weekends, and I will also be open during the bank holiday Mondays. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'll have to come again.
Oh, I hope so.
And thank you very much, Renate.
Yeah, thank you, Jilliana.
Bye.
Bye.